Good evening, everybody. I'm Sam Gorn, the City Attorney, and with me this evening is my law partner and Deputy City Attorney, Jacob Horowitz. Nice to see you, Jacob. Just a couple of items. Nice to have you all here. Nice to be in City Hall with you all. Welcome, Mayor and Commission as well. I usually get to sit on the dais, as you all know from experience, but tonight I'm in the audience, much like yourselves. Tonight's a very special night. The city charter, which is basically the city's Bible, the city's constitution, specifically does have some provisions I want to make sure you're aware of, which is the rules of the road that are being followed by FAU. FAU being a nonprofit public institution in Florida, they have prepared a consultant's report to the City Commission, which they'll review with you this evening. You'll see some slides and other things. But they're guided by the following language that exists in our city charter, which is very important for you to understand. It's section 3.02, subsection D. And what the charter says is the following. It says that the city of Pembroke Pines shall be divided, not maybe, but shall be divided into 4 election districts. 4 districts. The geographic boundaries of the 4 election districts shall be composed of roughly equal populations and shall be compact, proportional, and logically related to the natural boundaries of the neighborhoods within the city. The principles of non-discrimination and one person, one vote shall be strictly adhered to. The boundaries of the districts within the limits of the city as now existing are continued and may be amended as provided for by section 3.02E of the city charter, which requires the redistricting issue. The city has engaged appropriately an outside consultant, FAU. They're non-political, they're apolitical, they're nonpartisan, they're an independent Florida institution. You may know that Broward County just recently adopted their own districting maps. Their charter, which was also written by folks that are in this room, Jake and I worked as the attorneys for the Charter Review Commission in 2018, basically hired FIU to do a very similar type of study. Tonight you're going to hear directly from several very qualified professionals. You're going to hear from Dr. Kamek as well as Dr. Barassa, people who know their stuff and know exactly how to do their business. Tonight's presentation really is to show some depicted maps based upon those principles, as well as principles that are contained in both federal law, state law, and case decisions that relate to the things such as non-discrimination and compact communities and communities of interest, and all things that are considered in the context of a redistricting or reapportionment that's conducted every 10 years. Those are the rules of the road. The Mayor and Commission are not running a meeting tonight. This is a public hearing, public meeting, simply to hear from the public and allow FAU to understand best what's out there in the community and what things can be discussed by you should you have any questions. So that's my premise. I thank you for being here. Appreciate being in City Hall. Nice to be on this side of the dais every now and again, but I welcome your presence and certainly welcome the folks from FAU. Thank you very much, Mike. And our city clerk is here tonight also. You know Marlene, and she's here. Are you recording the course? And she's recording the meeting. It'll be on video a little later on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gorn. So before I take another step further, I'm going to introduce the redistricting team from Florida Atlantic University. But I also want to mention that the next steps from here, this is a public workshop. The City Commission, back in October, when we were under the premise that we needed to get the map in before December, asked, because that information changed, they asked to have this public meeting. So we've advertised this meeting through City Connect, our city newspaper, which gets delivered all over the city, on display boards in the city, our digital display boards. We've done it on social media. It's been on our website. There is information. So all of the maps that are here, including the preliminary report that came from FAU, are available on our website. All you have to do is type in redistricting in the search bar. All the information is right there. Anything that's coming forward literally is at your fingertips on our city website. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce Mr. James Carmack. He was here, Gamut Clark. He was here back in October and made a presentation to the City Commission. We had a workshop on that date. Again, he's back tonight to make another presentation, very similar to the previous presentation, with some subtle changes based on some comments that were discussed during the commission meeting. So we want to make sure that the audience gets all the information they can so they can ask some good questions. When we're done with the presentation, I've got a portable microphone. We'll go around the room and we'll ask some questions, and we'll be happy to give you the feedback that you need to have you understand this process. So, James, please.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. How are you? It's a pleasure to be back again and an honor. And Michael, you're forgiven for butchering my name. Everybody butchers my name. It's a hard one. So again, my name is James Gamma Clark, and I'm a senior instructor at Florida Atlantic University's Geosciences Department. And I'm here tonight with Dr. Stephen Barassa with the Urban Planning Department. And he and I were part of a team, along with Dr. Ron Schultz, also in the Geosciences Department, who worked on these redistricting alternatives that we've created for the city of Pembroke Pines. And so this evening, I'd like to present the alternatives that we've created for the city. If you go to the next slide, please, Joe. Great, thank you. So before we get into the alternatives, I'd just like to take a quick moment to talk about why it is that we go through the redistricting process. And this is going to exactly what Sam Gordon was mentioning a moment ago. Redistricting is very much based upon the premise of one person, one vote. So the idea is that if you want to have equal representation, you need to have districts that are, roughly speaking, have equal population. Why is this the case? Because if you consider for a moment an example where you have two districts and one is twice as big as another, then that larger district, the residents of that larger district will have half of the influence over their representative than the smaller district. So the residents of the larger districts are put at a disadvantage when it comes to their representation. So that's why in this country, in the United States of America, one person, one vote is the driving force that guides all redistricting efforts. Good. So this means that when you are presented with options that are practical, improve population equity, improve spatial compactness, and do so without artificially diluting a minority population, those options should be pursued. Okay, good. All right, so if you could go to the next slide, Joe. And actually, the next slide is just talking about the city charter, which Sam already did an excellent job of describing. So I won't belabor the point, except to say that this is, of course, consistent with the 1965 Voting Rights Act and its various amendments. Good. Let's talk a bit about the data that we used for this analysis. The data that we used is the standard data. It's the 2020 census redistricting file. That's Public Law 94-171. Now, specifically, the data that's collected by the census and disseminated to the various governments around the country comes at various scales of spatial resolution. And when you're doing a redistricting analysis for a municipality, as we are here, you want to use the smallest enumeration units. And so that data that we use specifically is the US Census blocks. Okay, and I'm going to show you in a moment what those census blocks look like. But again, we want to use these small census blocks because we need to take advantage of that spatial resolution so that we can carve out very specific lines such that we can achieve the population equity that we're looking for. Good. If you pull up the next point. All of these census blocks are going to be aggregated together to form the four districts that make up the city's district boundaries. The second set of data that we used for our study was housing data provided by city staff, specifically the Planning and Economic Development Department. And what that data did was allow us to create a population projection that went out to January of 2023. So in other words, any construction that occurred after Census Day of 2020 or any construction that's expected to be completed by 2023, we've used that data to create a population projection. The reason we do that, of course, is you don't want to go through all the headache and effort and expense of going through a redistricting analysis only for it to be null and void, completely non-applicable in just over 12 months' time. So that's why we did that population projection. Next slide, please, Joe. Good. Okay, so just to give you a sense of what these census blocks look like, you might be able to see it on the slide. the census blocks in this particular slide are shown by the green lines, and I've selected a few of them in our mapping software, and so they have those cyan outlines. The point being, census blocks are oftentimes exactly what you'd expect. They're nice and neat and compact and represent what you might expect a city block to look like. And when that's the case, that makes our life a little bit easier. Next slide, please, Joe. Other times, they are completely irregular. And as in this case, you see this very serpentine block wrapping around the shores of this lake boundary. Again, what does that mean to you? Well, you don't need to worry about it. That's just a headache for us. But we just thought it might be helpful for you to have a sense of what the type of spatial unit we're talking about in terms of census blocks. Next slide, please. Thank you. Good. Okay. So there are a couple of parameters that we used when we were going through this particular analysis. The first one is seeking reasonable population equality across the districts, where we want to make sure that we do not exceed a threshold of a maximum threshold of 10% overall deviation from the ideal size across the various districts. Thank you, Joe. The second criterion is geographic contiguity and appropriate compactness. As Mr. Gordon was mentioning, that's a requirement of the city charter, but it's also just part of our standard operating procedure. Where possible, we don't want to have boundaries that are snaking off all over the place. Good. And when we draw these boundaries, we always like to follow major natural and man-made boundaries where possible, and we try to respect various communities of interest. So population equality is of primary importance, which you would understand, of course, if we go back to that first slide where we talk about the principles of one person, one vote, right? We can't get one person, one vote without achieving population equality. But the other criteria that you see listed here are significant in guiding us towards reaching reasonable population balance. Next slide, please. Good. Okay, so here you can see on the screens behind me, also on this map to the far left, the boundaries that I'm sure you're all very familiar with. These are the Commission District boundaries of Pembroke Pines as they stand right now. These are the boundaries that we'll be looking to revise to achieve greater population equity. That's, you know, foreshadowing as to what's coming in the next couple of slides. Next, please, Joe. Okay, so if we look at the demographics of the city referring to just the 2020 census, the total population of Pembroke Pines is presently 171,178. Well, specifically, it was 171,178 on census day of 2020. Census day is April 1st. That's the timestamp that the census uses every 10 years to count the population of the country, of various municipalities, various levels of geography throughout the country. This gives us an average population of 42,795. That's a very important number, 42,795. Again, what are we trying to achieve? We're trying to achieve population equity. This suggests that when we look at that table, what we'd really like to see is that for District 1, 2, 3, and 4, every population number should be 42,795. If it's not, then we've got a problem. How much of a problem? Well, the problem is going to be based upon how great a difference we see between the 2020 population and the ideal average for our various districts. Next slide, please, Joe. That's going to be hard for me not to keep hitting that key. Good. Okay, so again, looking at the 2020 data, our largest district is District 1 at 44,754 people. That's 1,959 more people than the theoretical average. This gives us a deviation for District 1 of 4.58%. Joe, thank you. The smallest district, meanwhile, is District 2 at 41,423 people. That's 1,372 people less than the theoretical average. That means its deviation is 3.2%. Good. Next slide. Thank you. So while the current districts are not heavily unbalanced, the existing deviation is sufficient in our opinion to warrant redistricting. The spread is 7.78%, while the total deviation is 10.81%. And of course, that exceeds that maximum threshold of 10% for the overall deviation for the cities. Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you. Now we get to the 2023 projections that we were talking about. It's anticipated that the population of the city by January 2023 is going to grow by 1,369 people, bringing the total to 172,547. Of this growth, 1,109 people are going to be located in District 4, so that's a lot of growth in District 4. Joe, thank you. This brings the projected average for the city to 43,137. So that'll be the number that we'll want to pay attention to when we're looking at these districts projecting out to 2023. How close to that number, 43,137, are each of the districts? Joe, thank you. Good. So growth in the near future, you can go to the next one too. Growth in the near future will further imbalance the districts. The spread is going to be 7.12%, while the total deviation is going to grow to 12.69%. So to fix this, to get closer to that one person, one vote principle, to bring the districts into greater balance, what we're going to have to do is to adjust the boundaries of districts 1 and 4 such that they contract in favor of districts 2 and 3. Good. Thank you, Joe. Okay. So with that, we presented, we created and presented when we were here 2 months ago, 3 different alternatives for the commission to consider. All meet standard districting guidelines and the requirements of the city charter. They represent alternative ways to better balance the district populations and keep with the intent of the other identified guidelines that we discussed as part of our redistricting parameters. Thank you. We were directed by the city to create and provide a side-by-side analysis of both the present population, the 2020 data, and also our projected data out into 2023. And so while we have 3 alternatives, this effectively creates 6 different permutations, where the geographic boundaries is going to change from alternative 1 to alternative 2, and then from alternative 2 to alternative 3. But as we look at this data, each alternative is going to have 2 sets of tables, a 2020 table and a 2023 table. So as we go through the presentation, you'll notice that these are labeled as 1.1 versus 1.2, 2.1 versus 2.2, 3.1 versus 3.2. Thank you, Joe. Good. So let's talk about alternative 1. Alternative 1 is a minimalist approach, which is always our teams. When we attack these particular puzzles, we always start with a minimalist approach. We say, okay, here are these existing districts. Are they out of alignment? If so, how do we fix that by making the smallest amount of change possible, right? So it's purely focusing on population balance. Here are the existing districts. We can make a carve here. We can make a carve there. Boom, we're back in population balance. And hopefully, you might find the commissioners or the population might find this least disruptive, and maybe that becomes a preferred option. Thank you. So the strict focus on improving overall population balance, of course, is our first criteria. It's getting at that one person, one vote idea. And we achieve this by moving territory from districts 1 and 4 to districts 2 and 3. Okay. So as I was alluding to, of all 3 alternatives that we're going to go over this evening, this particular alternative has the smallest geographic impact on the current districts. Good. Okay. So here we see a map that shows you the difference between the existing districts and what the districts would look like under alternative 1. And specifically, the difference is highlighted by the red hatching that you see on this map. So in other words, we've got 2 and only 2 changes in this particular alternative, one out in the eastern part of the city and one in the western part of the city. Again, we're trying to change the boundaries as little as we possibly can. And this achieves the job. Next slide. Here we see those same boundaries, except this time we've removed the red hatching. So this is what the city's commission district boundaries would look like were the commission to choose alternative 1. Thank you, Joe. Next slide. Very good. Okay, so let's talk specifically about the changes that occur under alternative 1. The first one, which is out west, District 3 absorbs that area found between Northwest 208th and US 27th in the east-west direction, and Johnson Street and Pines Boulevard in the north-south direction. Next point, please, Joe. This land is taken from District 4. Of course, District 3 is presently 1,283 people below average and is going to gain 1,765 people through this move, while District 4 will be, come 2023, 1,119 people above average. Next point, please, Joe. And so this move was specifically made with this future growth in mind, okay? It's also worth noting, while we're on this slide, that this particular change is also going to be included in alternative 2. So if you just put a pin in that, we'll address it again when we get back to alternative 2. Thank you very much, Joe. The second change for alternative 1 is District 2. In this case, the northerly jog in the border between Districts 1 and 2 is shifted to the east from Douglas Road to University Drive. This land, of course, is taken from District 1. District 1 is the largest in terms of population and least balanced of the existing districts, with 1,959 more people than the average. District 2 is 1,372 people below the average, and so this swap is granting District 2 an additional 1,758 people. Again, this particular change is central, essential, in fact, to achieving population equity in the districts of Pembroke Pines. And so you'll see this particular change incorporated into all 3 of the alternatives that we're presenting this evening. Good. Thank you, Joe. So let's talk about what that does for us quantitatively. And again, we're doing the side-by-side analysis, so we're going to look at the 2020 data first, and then we're going to look at the 2023 data. So starting with the present conditions, 1.1, the 2020 data. Overall deviation is much improved under alternative 1. It falls from 10.81% to 6.6%. That's an average deviation of 1.65 and a spread of 5.23. Joe, thank you. The only reason, of course, that it's this high is because the boundaries of District 4 have specifically been drawn to accommodate this future growth that we're talking about, okay? So if you look actually in the last row here, District 4, you'll see that the deviation for District 4 is negative 3.3%. You'll see this number and again and again and again, right? So again, just put a mental note there, right? So it's negative 3.3% because we're anticipating future growth. So when we jump forward to the 2023 data, you'll see that number come down, please. Good. So looking at that future growth, accounting for that future growth, not surprisingly, the balance has improved. And so District 4's deviation drops from negative 3.3% down to negative 1.5%. The total deviation is just 3.65%, but when we look at the future projected data, with an average of only 0.91% and a spread of 2.62%. It's well worth noting that of all the alternatives and permutations that I'm going to present to you this evening, it's very worth noting that this particular alternative, this particular permutation, has the lowest of all the deviations. So again, if alternative 1's goal was to change the existing boundaries, achieve population equity while making the minimum amount of changes, that's mission accomplished. Thank you. It's worth noting here, just briefly, that with these minimal changes, you wouldn't expect there to be dramatic impacts on the demographics of each of the districts, okay? So what we see here, you'll forgive me if you have a hard time reading this. It's in the report if you want to look further. But what you're seeing here is the census data broken down into race and ethnicity as the census defines it. Okay, those aren't our definitions, that's the census definitions. So we initially see a series of columns that define race, and then the last two columns define ethnicity, again, as the census defined it, where the census defines ethnicity, as being either Hispanic or Latino or not Hispanic or Latino, okay? Why do I show you this data, right? The point is, when I created this particular table, I had to throw in 2 decimal places for each column, because without 2 decimal places, you really couldn't see much of a change from one alternative to the next, right? The change is very, very minimal. So we could randomly pick any one of these cells here, and you might see that from the existing to alternative 1, or as we go forward, we'll look at these again as we look at alternative 2 and alternative 3. Oftentimes, when you go from the existing districts to another alternative, in this case, alternative 1, you're talking about a change of a fraction of a percent in terms of any one of these categories, right? Any one of these race categories, any one of these ethnic categories, all the way up to maybe 1.5%. So if we look at District 1, for example, and we look at the Hispanic column, you'll see that in the existing districts, the percentage of Hispanic people living in District 1 is 44.43%. And in under Alternative 1, the percentage of Hispanic people that are going to be residing in District 1 is going to go to 44.2%. So it's a tiny fraction of a percent. And this is, again, I could pick any one of these cells. This is very consistent. So I mention this here. We bring this up because the idea that you don't just redistrict to affect a minority population is critically important. And we just show this data here to illustrate that that's not happening. And of course, with such small geographic changes, you wouldn't expect that to occur. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so now we switch to Alternative 2. Alternative 2 seeks improved geographic compactness. That's our second criterion to go along with the improved population balance that we described previously. So this builds off of the changes reflected in Alternative 1. So both of those geographic changes that we described previously, both of those in the east and the western part of the city, both of those are going to be incorporated into Alternative 2. You'll see that on the map in a moment. Specifically, the goal here is to make the border between Districts 2 and 3 as compact as possible. And the way we do that is to make those borders as straight as possible. And so you're going to see that in the next map. Go ahead, please, Joe. Thank you. So here we see the change map. You see those same 2 changes that we saw before in the far east of the city, far west of the city. Both of those changes are being included in Alternative 2. So in this case, we're really concerned with the changes that are going on at the center of the map, right up and down Flamingo. Next map, please. And so were the commission to select Alternative 2, this is what the commission district boundaries would look like. Okay? Next slide, please, Joe. Thank you very much. Okay. So for the first of these 2 changes, it's going to impact District 3. The southeast boundary of District 3 is now going to be squared off to follow the major thoroughfares. So the southern border now continues along Pines Boulevard all the way to Flamingo Road, which now forms its eastern boundary north up to Johnson Street. So really squaring off that southeastern corner. The impact of this, of course, is that this territory is taken from District 2. So District 2, under the existing maps, protrude out all the way underneath that hatched area. And so under this alternative, C.B. Smith Park would now be unified under a single district. And this particular swap impacts 3,929 residents. Under this alternative, they would be moved from District 2 to District 3. And again, it's worth noting that this boundary change will persist into the next alternative that we'll discuss, Alternative 3. Thank you, Joe. The next change would be to attempt to, again, if ideally, from a compactness point of view, make Flamingo the border between these two districts. However, there's just too many people in that part of District 3 that protrude east of Flamingo Road to make that swap work, okay? So what we do instead is move only those eastern neighborhoods, and of course it has to be the eastern neighborhoods because it has to be the territory, the land that's contiguous with the existing District 2. And so under this alternative, the neighborhoods Pierpoint East, Colony Point, Villa Lakes, Gardens at Pembroke Lakes, and Pembroke Lakes are all moved into District 2. In this particular arrangement, the waterways, the lakes, serve as the border between Districts 2 and 3, and this swap moves 3,230 people into District 2. Thank you, Joe. Good. So, again, we go back to the tables. How does this work for us quantitatively? And I remind you, we're going to look at the 2020 data first, and then we're going to jump up to the 2023 data. Looking at the 2020 data, table 2.1, the overall deviation is improved under the existing districts. It's going to fall from 10.81 as it stands in the existing data, the existing districts under the 2020 data, down to 8.06, with an average of 2.02 and a spread of 6.86. As with alternative 1, District 4's boundaries are drawn to accommodate future growth, which results in higher deviation under present conditions. So if you look at that bottom row under District 3, under District 4, you'll notice that same number again, negative 3.3%. We would expect that number to drop if we look at the future data. Go ahead, please, Joe. And indeed it does. So looking at the 2023 data, the total deviation falls down to 5.48% with an average of 1.37 and a spread of 4.24. So this alternative, alternative 2, both improves the compactness of the city's districts and offers good population balance both now and into the near future. Thank you. I've added this here for completeness. You can see, if you care to inspect it, that again, under these this particular alternative, that the impact on demographic balance between the districts is very much nominal. Thank you. So finally, we have alternative 3. And alternative 3 was created specifically to maintain the integrity of communities in the city. So alternative 2 addressed both the compactness and population issues, but it did have the effect of moving a condominium community, specifically Colony Point, out of District 3 and into District 2. Presently, under the existing districts, each of the 4 districts includes one of the 4 major condominium communities. Hollybrook's in District 1, Park Place is in District 2, Colony Point is in District 3, and Century Village is in District 4. So to maintain this status, Alternative 3 is going to build off of Alternative 2, but it's going to return Colony Point and its 899 residents back to District 3. Doing so is going to create imbalance. To address this is going to require that District 3 give up population elsewhere, which is achieved by restoring the boundaries of District 4 to their current form, okay? So this is going to achieve population equity, but it will not take into account the future growth that you'll see in District 4, which we'll see in a moment. Thank you, Joe. So here we see the change map again with the difference between the existing and the districts proposed under Alternative 3 being highlighted by the red hatching. And you'll notice that conspicuously absent is the red hatching in the western part of the city. That block that we saw there is no longer included under this particular alternative. Go ahead, please, Joe. And of course, this is what your commission district boundaries would look like were the commission to adopt Alternative 3 as the future commission districts for Pembroke Pines. Thank you, Joe. Good. So let's talk about the specific changes that occur under this alternative. As an alternative to the east, bless you, the eastern neighborhoods north of Johnson Street and south of Taft Street are moved from District 3 to District 2. This impacts Pierpoint East, Villa Lakers, Gardens at Pembroke Lakes, and Pembroke Lakes. However, Colony Point in this alternative is retained by District 3. For the sake of compactness, we also moved Pembroke Pines Mall to District 3. And of course, hopefully there's nobody living in Pembroke Pines Mall, so that shouldn't affect the population numbers. So in total, 2,331 people are moved into District 2. Thank you. And I just want to remind you, as we saw in that previous map, right, keep in mind, the removal of Colony Point and its 899 residents is being offset by not making this move that we saw previously, right, as we saw in the previous two alternatives, Alternative 1 and Alternative 2. Thank you, Joe. Good. So, looking at Alternative 3 under the 2020 data, the overall deviation is improved under Alternative 3. It falls down to 5.66% with an average of 1.42%, and the spread is 4.37%. District 4 is no longer drawn to accommodate future growth, and so the overall deviation is improved, much improved, under the present conditions. If we jump forward to the 2023 data, you'll see this number go up. Good. So the total deviation under 2023 is 6.65% with an average of 1.6%, 66%, excuse me, and a spread of 5.59%. So what does Alternative 3 do for us? Population balance and compactness are achieved under this scenario, and it maintains the relationship between the condominiums and their existing districts if that's deemed to be desirable. Next. And yet again, we see these same tables, and yet again, we see that the demographic difference between these various cohorts between the existing districts and Alternative 3 is very much nominal. Thank you, Joe. So to summarize, all three, and you're very glad, right? All three alternatives serve to reestablish population balance amongst the four districts, both today and into the near future. Alternative 1 is a minimalist approach that focuses on improving overall population balance. Alternative 2 focuses on improving geographic compactness within the constraints of maintaining reasonable population balance. And Alternative 3 seeks to consider all the redistricting criteria as population balance, compactness, and maintaining the integrity of the existing communities. Good. And with that, that's the end of my presentation. We would be very happy, thank you very much, to answer any questions that you might have.
Before I take the next step, and we're going to ask some questions in the audience, FAU has been part of this process. In fact, I actually got my job here at the city because I did the redistricting back in 2001 when I was a graduate student. And I was introduced to the Pines community, and it's where my conversation with Pembroke Pines started. We've been part of this process for a very long time. And again, this was presented back in October. The last point I need to make, when we have done these options in the past, when the consultants have provided us with options, very often the future growth is something that we're considering. When we redistricted the last time, we knew City Center was coming. We knew that we were developing Raintree. So District 1 was put at the lowest end of the spectrum to try to account for that growth so that the districts would not be too far out of alignment come the 2020 census. So in a sense, redistricting is often a planning tool. The commission will have options. The commission can choose realistically any of these four options. They can choose not to do anything and keep the map status quo. They can pick one of the three options. The one thing they have to do is they have to pick something, and we have to adopt it by ordinance and send it off to the supervisor of elections. So with that thought process in mind, some action has to be taken. And I'm bringing this to the public because very often the public may not make it back for the next meeting. You may have seen some information that you saw today, and I just want to let everybody know that something is going to happen. Whatever that something is, it's up to our elected officials to make that decision as a collective body. Last point. And Joe, is the presentation still live? Can you just arrow back to the second slide? Our charter, and thanks to our city attorney, and actually you, the electorate, when you voted for this, provides the commission the ability to re-engage redistricting at a future date. And I think that's very, very important. And Mr. Gorin mentioned it. I think it's the third slide, Joe. I'm sorry, keep clicking and clicking and clicking, but I want to make sure that everybody understands that should the commission not do anything, it doesn't mean that we're locked in till the 2030 census. They could look in the future at maybe re-engaging this effort. And I bring that up because, again, options are what's important. There's great latitude when it comes to redistricting, as Sam said. However, we also have guidelines that are outlined in our city charter that direct how we do that. So there's that language. Following the decennial census in 2010 and every 10 years thereafter, or sooner if determined by the commission, they have the ability to engage this action. Prior to this charter amendment, we used to do this every 4 years. Now, we look at this every 10 years as we've achieved build-out. Again, part of this workshop was, or excuse me, public meeting, I'm not supposed to say workshop. Part of this public meeting is an education so that our audience, our public, the people that are watching this on TV, and the people that will watch this on YouTube later can understand why we engage in this effort. So anyway, I just want to thank, first of all, before I get there, thank everybody for being here. I saw a hand go up. I'll hand the mic over.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Thank you for, presenting. Your presentation was excellent, and the choices are amazing. For me and for the community I live, it's very important to keep communities together. And I see that you accomplish that because, it is important to be represented, one area represented by one commissioner and not be split up by two. I live in Chapel Trail, and I see that you, again, I believe that before you took a chunk of Chapel Trail. I see that one of the alternatives takes another chunk of Chapel Trail. So I perceive it as breaking it up some more and not seeing it as a whole. I understand compactness, but it is important, again, and, the commissioners are here to keep communities together. Like we, 100% I'm behind keeping communities together like Colony Point and Hollybrook and Century Village. And I will hope that Chapel Trail can be looked as a whole, as a community, and not take another chunk again.
Thank you. Is there any other questions?
Was that a question?
Oh, I was just a comment,
Oh, okay.
But also this Chapel Trail is looked at as a whole community.
I understand.
Sure. And I know James can answer this, and and I'm going to attempt to answer partially. I know in this permutation and some of these options where that happens, Chapel Trail has a couple different housing types, similar to what we have in Pembroke Falls. So Pembroke Falls in our existing map today, Pembroke Falls, if you're in the multifamily communities of Pembroke Falls, you're in District 2, and if you're in the single-family community in Pembroke Falls, you're in District 3. So I think that's kind of the same type of thought process that in these options where they move it to District 3, Malibu and Chapel Grove are multifamily townhouse communities. So they move them in that particular option. So in the existing map, it stays, and in option 3, it stays. But in these two options, to handle the future growth that's coming with Merrick and with the post office, that change is accommodated. So I'm bringing that up just where we went. We've done that in the past in other options to attain the population equity. I know James and I talked about that when he presented this option. This is what the thought process was. Again, I'm not speaking for you, James, but that was just one of the thought processes because we have done it before. So I just wanted to make sure I addressed that so that it was an understand. I saw another hand go up, ma'am, behind me. Wendell, I'll get you grabbed in a second, okay? Thank you, ma'am.
Hi, I just want to make sure that I understood what I've been watching. So some of us are here from Century Village because our village paper printed an editorial saying that there was a suggestion to divide up Century Village. And the COPA people were terribly against it, as are we. We don't want to divide our community. So my understanding from what I just saw, there is not one scenario where you divided up Century Village, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. That's all I wanted to know.
George will be back there in a second.
Good evening. One of the things, the reasons why we're here from Century Village is that I understand back at the October meeting that there was a presentation made about splitting Century Village into two sections that would have two different commissions. Now, since then, I sent a couple of letters to the commissioners, and we were concerned if that was the situation. We want to be represented by one commission for sure, because there's no place else in the state that's a 55 community represented by two commissioners. So according to what you're showing tonight, and one of the things that I happen to like about your alternative 3 is that you really put everybody, all the 55 communities, Colony Point, Hollybrook, Century Village, all in where they are now without changing them. So I was going to reread the letter. I don't think I need to do that. It looks like, our only concern was to keep Century Village in one district, and we're happy where we are. So we would highly recommend that type of thing. Actually, any of those 4 work fine for us, so it would be depending upon other situations. So thank you.
Yeah, so that's exactly correct. During the previous meeting, at no time in the presentation did anybody from our team suggest splitting Century Village. So if that suggestion was out there, it didn't come from us.
My question is what is the average cost of this process? If we incur that cost once every 10 years, it looks like that would be sufficient. But, like you said, Mike, the commission has the option to go ahead and get involved in the process whenever they see fit. Is that correct?
So the charter provides the commission that opportunity. Redistricting projects like this, I mean, it's a public record, this is about $25,000 plus or minus. It's pretty consistent. The Broward County process, just for the record, is a lot more than that. It's well over $100,000. $150,000. So, but okay. In terms of the city budget, this is something that the city budget, we had to look at this. We used to incur this cost, and if you remember the ballot language back in 2014, and I'm sure Sam can remind me, cost was one of the thought processes, is that we were doing this every 4 years, and very often it was not in line with the census, because if you keep adding the 4 years, you fall off of the census at some point. So when we went back, and when the charter was finally amended by the electorate, voters, it put this process there. But astutely, this happened. And for the record, the reason this is there is something like Raintree. Should a golf course close down and redevelopment occur and a large project push development to another scale, you want to make sure that there's still equity within the district. I use golf course because we've seen golf courses close throughout South Florida. Hillcrest closed in Hollywood, which caused a major growth, a couple thousand people, which in Hollywood situation, that's more dramatic because they have 6 commissioners and their districts are much smaller. We had Raintree close in our city, which added 498 new homes. Again, we were prepared for it because we made sure that District 1 at the time was a little bit lower so that it could sustain the growth in the district. But that is definitely the way the charter was written, it's the way the voters supported it, and it does give the commission that option, Mr. Foreman.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Comments? And and I'll say to my students, criticism? No? So,
Thank you.
Ryan, your question?
Besides feeling like I just went back to a college stats class, I just went, you can't hear me? Okay, is that better? Okay. So just to clarify, you're saying that alternative district map number 3 allows for the growth of our city for the long term into 2023.
All of the alternatives presented meet the thresholds of achieving population equity. Alternative 1 specifically focuses on population equity. Alternative 2, we sacrifice a little population equity in terms of achieving better compactness. And with alternative 3, we achieve something very similar, except we make sure that each of the 4 major condos are in each of one of the 4 districts.
Gotcha. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's the way it is today. And by the way, the reason that was there is the last time we redistricted, it was a direct comment from the city commission that each district maintained one of the condominiums. So it was part of the motion when they decided on which map to pick, that it was, and part of the conversation. So that's where that came from. Didn't come out of thin air. So are there any other comments or questions?
Great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having us.
One thing, how's our bike path going?
We're working. We're working.